I still remember the sound of his laughter echoing through that courtroom. Cold, mocking Will, he stood there in his expensive suit, looking at me like I was nothing, like everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, meant absolutely nothing. She's just a housewife, he told the judge. She doesn't understand how the real world works. 23 years. I gave 23 years to that family. I raised him when his own mother walked away. I held his hand through every failure, every heartbreak, every second chance he never deserved. And this is how he repaid me. By trying to take everything, my home, my security, my dignity. He thought I would crumble. He thought I had no fight left. But he forgot one important detail about me. And when the judge looked up, everything changed. My name is Harper. I am 50 years old. I wasn't always this woman standing in courtrooms fighting for what's mine. Once I was soft, trusting, maybe too trusting. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. My parents owned a little bakery, nothing fancy, just honest work and warm bread every morning. They taught me that kindness was strength, that loyalty meant everything, that family was sacred. I believed them. I carried those beliefs into my adult life like precious cargo. They shaped every decision I made, every relationship I built, every sacrifice I offered without being asked. When I met my husband, I was 31, already feeling like life had passed me by. My friends were married with children. I was alone, working long hours as a legal consultant for a small firm downtown. Nobody is glamorous. Nobody is important. Just a woman who understood contracts and fine print and how to protect people from their own bad decisions. He was a widower, charming, gentle, broken in a way that made me want to fix him. And he had a son. The boy was only 9 when I entered their lives. Quiet, angry, grieving a mother who had walked out when he was barely 4 years old. She left one morning and never came back. No note, no explanation, just silence where a mother should have been. I understood that kind of wound. So I loved him. Not carefully, not conditionally. I loved him like he was my own. I helped with homework. I attended every school play. I sat through every parent-teacher conference while his father worked late. I packed lunches with little notes inside. I celebrated every small victory like it was a miracle. And slowly he let me in. He started calling me Mom when he was 12, not because anyone told him to, because he wanted to. I remember that day so clearly. We were sitting on the porch after a rainstorm. The air smelled like wet grass and new beginnings. "Can I call you Mom?" he asked, so small, so hopeful. I cried for an hour after he went to bed. Those were the good years, the years I hold on to even now, even after everything. My husband and I built a life together. We bought a house outside the city, a real home, garden in the back, porch with rocking chairs, the kind of place where you imagine growing old. I left my consulting job to manage things at home. It made sense at the time. My husband's business was expanding. Someone needed to handle the household, the finances, the endless details of keeping a family running. I became the foundation no one saw, the invisible work, the unpaid labor of love. I didn't mind. I had a purpose, I had a family, I had everything I thought I wanted. But looking back, the signs were there, small cracks I refused to see. My stepson changed in college. He became distant, secretive. He stopped calling me Mom and started calling me by my first name. He explained it away as maturity, independence. I told myself it was normal. When he graduated, he joined his father's company. That's when the whispers started. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Paperwork I wasn't allowed to see. Meetings I wasn't invited to. And my husband said it was business, nothing I needed to worry about. I was worried anyway. Then my husband got sick. Cancer, fast and merciless, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. I held his hand every single day. I slept in hospital chairs. I watched the man I loved disappear piece by piece. And through it all, my stepson was barely there. Always busy, always somewhere else, always promising to visit tomorrow. The day after the funeral, he finally showed up. But not to grieve. He came with a lawyer. He came with documents. He came with a cold expression I had never seen before. He told me, My name wasn't on the house. He told me the accounts had been transferred months ago. He told me I had 30 days to leave. Then he looked at me with those eyes I had once watched fill with tears over a lost mother. And he said, "You were never really family." The days after that moment blurred together like watercolors left in the rain. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't understand how my life had collapsed so completely without warning. I kept replaying his words in my mind, over and over, searching for some explanation, some mistakes, some sign that this wasn't really happening. But it was real. I had 30 days to leave the home I had lived in for over 2 decades, the home where I had planted roses in the backyard, the home where I had celebrated birthdays and holidays and quiet Sunday mornings, the home I thought would be mine until I died. Gone, just like that. I started making phone calls to lawyers, to banks, to anyone who might help me understand what had happened. That's when I discovered the first layer of betrayal. And my husband had changed his will 8 months before he died. The original will left everything to me: the house, the savings, his share of the business. I had seen that document myself years ago. But the new will left everything to his son, every single asset. I was mentioned only once, a small paragraph thanking me for my years of service. Service. Like I had been the housekeeper. Like I had been hired help rather than a wife. I couldn't breathe when I read those words. But it got worse. I requested bank records. What I found made my hands shake. Someone had been withdrawing money from our joint savings for over a year. Small amounts at first, then larger. By the time my husband died, the account was nearly empty. The withdrawals were authorized by my husband, but the dates didn't make sense. Some of them happened while he was in the hospital, too weak to hold a pen, too medicated to understand what he was signing. Someone had guided his hand. Someone had whispered in his ear during those final, vulnerable months. I think I knew who, but I couldn't prove it yet. Then I discovered the third betrayal. My stepson had been telling people I was unstable, greedy, that I had tried to manipulate his dying father, that I had isolated him from family and friends. Old neighbors stopped returning my calls. Friends from church avoided eye contact. Even my husband's sister sent me a message saying she needed space. I was being erased, not just from the family, from the entire community. 23 years of love and sacrifice, rewritten as manipulation and greed. I started doubting myself. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe I hadn't been enough. Maybe I deserved this somehow. The guilt was suffocating. Then I found the photographs, hidden in my husband's office, tucked inside an old book I was packing. Pictures of my stepson with his biological mother, recent pictures, dated from the past 3 years. She hadn't disappeared. She had been in contact with him all along. And in one photograph, she was standing in my kitchen. I sat on the floor of that empty office for 3 hours, just staring at those photographs. The woman who had abandoned her son, the woman whose absence had shaped his entire childhood, the woman I had tried so hard to replace with love and consistency. She had been there, in my home, while my husband was dying. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to call my stepson and unleash every ounce of rage burning in my chest. But I didn't. Something cold and quiet settled over me instead. I put the photographs back exactly where I found them. I closed the book. I left the office as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I stopped crying, stopped begging lawyers to find loopholes, stopped defending myself to people who had already decided I was guilty. Instead, I started watching. I watched my stepson post on social media about his grief, about losing his father, about carrying on the family legacy. The comments poured in. "So sorry for your loss. Your father would be so proud. You're so strong." Not one mention of me. I watched him move into the house with his mother, the house that was legally his now. I drove by one evening and saw them through the window, laughing, celebrating. I watched him take over his father's business, saw the announcements in the local paper, new leadership, fresh vision, exciting changes ahead. He was building his future on everything my husband and I had created together. And I was supposed to disappear quietly. For weeks, I did nothing. I moved into a small apartment across town. I took a part-time job at a library. I lived small and invisible. But I was thinking, planning, remembering. I thought about revenge. Real revenge, the kind that would hurt him the way he had hurt me. But every time I imagined it, I saw that 9-year-old boy on the porch. Can I call you Mom? The anger would soften, then harden again, a constant war inside me. I didn't want to become cruel. I didn't want to destroy him just because he had destroyed me. But I also couldn't let him win, couldn't let the lies stand, couldn't let him erase me from a life I had built with my own hands. So I made a choice. Not revenge, truth. I would use what I knew, what I had always been good at: contracts, documents, fine print, the law. I started going through every piece of paperwork I had saved over the years: receipts, tax returns, emails, photographs, 23 years of proof that I had been there, that I had contributed, that I had mattered. I found inconsistencies, signatures that didn't match, dates that didn't align, small cracks in the story my stepson had built. And then I found something bigger: a document my husband had signed 3 years ago, before he got sick, before everything changed. A partnership agreement. My name was on it. I didn't run to a lawyer immediately. I sat with that document for 2 days, reading it over and over, understanding every word, every clause, every implication. My husband had made me a silent partner in his business 3 years before his death. 20% ownership. It was his way of protecting me, of making sure I would always have something if anything happened to him. He had told me about it once, over dinner, casual, like it was no big deal. I had forgotten. Life got busy. He got sick. The paperwork disappeared into a filing cabinet, and I never thought about it again. But it was real, legally binding, notarized and registered with the state, which meant my stepson didn't own the entire business like he thought he did. I owned a piece of it too. I made copies of everything. Then I found a lawyer. Not someone local, someone 2 towns over, who didn't know my stepson, didn't know the story, just knew the law. She reviewed the documents for 3 hours. Then she looked up at me and said, "You have a case, a strong one." We filed quietly, no announcements, no drama, just paperwork submitted to the court. My stepson didn't know until he was served. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard about it later. He was in a meeting with potential investors, planning to expand the business, talking about his vision for the future. The process server walked in and handed him the papers in front of everyone. He called me that night, furious, threatening. I didn't answer. My lawyer handled everything, clean, professional, by the book. Discovery started. Both sides had to provide documents, financial records, emails, communication logs. That's when the cracks really began to show. The court requested documentation for all major business decisions made since my husband's death. My stepson provided them. Confidence, probably thinking there was nothing to hide. But my lawyer noticed something. Several contracts had been backdated, signed weeks after my husband died, but made to look like they had his approval. His signature was on them, but the ink analysis showed they were recent forgeries. My stepson had been covering his tracks, making it look like his father had wanted him to have full control, creating a paper trail that didn't exist. It was a fraud, simple and clear. My lawyer filed an amended complaint, added new claims, requested an investigation. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a partnership dispute anymore. Word spread quickly in our small business community. Investors started asking questions, clients became nervous. People who had celebrated my stepson's leadership began distancing themselves. The local paper ran a story, not a hit piece, just facts. Business owner faces legal challenge from late father's widow. Questions raised about contract authenticity. His social media went quiet. Then his mother made a mistake. She posted a long rant defending her son, calling me a gold digger, saying I had never loved my husband, saying I was trying to steal what rightfully belonged to her child. She forgot that she had legally abandoned that child 20 years ago. She forgot that she had no rights, no standing, no credibility. My lawyer submitted her post as evidence, proof of coordination, proof that she had been involved all along. The judge was not amused. More depositions followed. My stepson had to testify under oath. He stumbled, contradicted himself, couldn't explain the timeline discrepancies. His lawyer tried to settle, offered me a small payout to go away quietly. I refused, not out of spite, out of principle. Because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the truth. It was about making sure that 23 years of my life weren't erased by lies and forged signatures. It was about proving that I had been there, that I had mattered, that I was more than just a housewife who didn't understand how the real world worked. The trial date was set. That's when things got interesting. Because the judge assigned to our case was someone I never expected to see again. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, quiet, almost ordinary. I sat at the table with my lawyer, hands folded, heart steady. I had waited months for this moment. I could wait a few more hours. My stepson arrived late. His expensive suit looked wrinkled now. His confidence had faded. He avoided looking at me. His mother sat in the gallery behind him, still defiant, still believing her son would win. And then the judge entered. I recognized her immediately. 15 years ago, she had been a young law student struggling to pass her ethics exam. She had come to me for tutoring. 3 months of late-night sessions, coffee and flashcards, and long conversations about justice and fairness and doing the right thing even when it was hard. She had passed with the highest score in her class. I hadn't seen her since, but I had followed her career from a distance. I watched her rise through the system, proud of her, like a teacher is proud of a student who exceeds all expectations. Now she sat above us all, robed in black, ready to deliver judgment. She looked at me once, a brief moment of recognition. Then she turned to the proceedings with complete professionalism. The evidence was presented, methodically, carefully. Every forged document, every backdated contract, every lie my stepson had told to steal what wasn't his. His lawyer tried to argue, I tried to explain, tried to create doubt, but the facts were undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor. Full restoration of my partnership rights, financial compensation for the assets improperly transferred, a formal investigation into the forgery charges. My stepson sat frozen. His mother started crying, not from sadness, from rage. But I felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, just a deep, heavy exhaustion. 23 years, gone, burned down by someone I had raised, someone I had loved like my own child. I won, but what did I really win? A business I never wanted to run alone. Money that couldn't replace the family I had lost. Justice that came too late to undo the betrayal. As I left the courtroom, I passed my stepson in the hallway. He looked at me. For the first time since this began, I saw something real in his eyes. Regret, maybe even shame. He opened his mouth to speak. I didn't stop walking. Some words come too late to matter. I stepped outside into the afternoon sun. The air was warm. Birds were singing somewhere in the distance. Life was continuing all around me as if nothing had happened. I took a deep breath, then another. I didn't know what came next, didn't know where I would go or who I would become. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was never just a housewife. I was the woman who built a family from nothing, watched it burn, and still walked out standing.